What's in it for me? Well, I mean, obviously we spent a great amount of time talking about what is DevOps, so to speak. So hopefully you understand that we're going to provide you an understanding of what DevOps is, as well as provide you with an understanding of the technical challenges that are in DevOps, and then how to choose the best tools to help with those technical challenges. Another part is how to choose when to deploy applications into the cloud, right? There's a movie that kind of quoted, hey, no one knows what the cloud is. Who knows what the cloud is, right? And it's still kind of, it's a very overused term, and we're going to provide some clarity on that overuse and the different components of that. Additionally, we're going to talk about, different security issues and then how to identify the differences between requirements and architecture. And then how do you write user acceptance story? So we're going to walk through this whole gamut of things that are in it for you, and that'll provide you with the ability to do DevOps when you go back to your jobs. So DevOps is short for development operations. So if you look right over here, right, in this diagram, okay, this is where we're focusing on for a minute, right? So DevOps is the combination of software engineering, quality assurance, and operations. If you would, it's where those things intersect, right? So where does development intersect with operations? Well, the answer is easily one of the things we can easily see is when we deploy our application from development to operations for use. That's one place that development work intersects operations, right? But as a part of that, we also understand that, providing the same type of context to the developer for application development is very important, right? So that's another place of intersection for development and operations. For quality assurance, right, is really just that. In order to provide consistency in production level code, that's where it interacts with development and operations, right? Ensuring that your perhaps that your documentation is up to par for these applications. Again, could be another place that QA, quality assurance, meets up with DevOps as well. So DevOps are these people that kind of work and operate in these different areas. Now, again, I told you earlier that sometimes we have skills that transfer from development, from quality assurance and operations, and they transfer to a new context of development operations, right? So each one of you have a background that is kind of more focused on probably more than likely one of the three. If not, it's still okay. But your context and your skill set is based upon these three areas. But where DevOps, this is where they all three meet. So your skills are important, right? So DevOps, it focuses on the level of collaboration. I cannot overstress this enough. Your ability to collaborate with the developers, with those who control operations, those who maintain the software and hardware, and those who coordinate with the building or with building staff or logistics is so important. So let me give you a perfect example. So why do you need to collaborate with the people in the building? Well, so you get the building maintenance people, right? And often they control the power to the building. So if they're going through some routine maintenance that's going to require the power to be shut off, and maybe you have backups that automatically switch over, sometimes you don't. Well, in that case, it would become imperative to be able to communicate, have a level of communication with the building staff, building maintenance folks, so that you can ensure that your operation, your power is available for when you switch. But sometimes, quite honestly, even if you do, sometimes when they make the switch, things fail. So just understanding that they're performing some maintenance on the electric panel or on the generators and so forth is very critical to you. Not only for that reason, but sometimes you have some requirements that are in place that requires by law, requires by your standard of operations that a backup be in place. And the backup being shut down for operations violates that policy, right? So it's important that you're able to collaborate with the building staff. Additionally, when deploying, right, just simply getting an application from development over to operations, right, that's a challenge. So whenever that happens, there has to be some level of collaboration, some level of communication between those who are deploying the application and to those who have developed it. I am acutely aware that just because you deploy it doesn't always mean that it works, right? So sometimes, it's good that, the way that and I want to say this too, it's important that your teams are set up in a way that fosters the best level of communication. Okay, I'm gonna say that one more time because it's an important point to make. It's important that your teams are set up in a way that fosters the best level of communications, right? I would probably tell you that it's good to avoid silos as much as possible. And what I mean by that is that sometimes you have the people who implement DevOps, here's what they'll do sometimes. They'll say, hey, let's have a development team, let's have a QA team, let's have an operations team. Well, I get or DevOps team, excuse me. Well, doing that is great in that you kind of, putting all the DevOps in one place. But the problem with that is that you still create these silos where the developers are separate from DevOps and DevOps is separate from everything else. So in my experience, and this is strictly my experience, it has proven more successful when the DevOps are integrated directly on the various project teams. So, Ritesh, that those daily Scrum meetings, that is one way to do it, but it moves beyond just those Scrum meetings, right? There are some decisions, there's some choices that you make in the development of a product that could include or exclude certain people that it shouldn't. And that's dangerous, right? From maintaining your flexibility, maintaining your scalability, and maintaining reliability standpoint. It's important that as these tools are developed, they're not developed in the dark. In Scrum meetings, they're very pointed and very short. But what they do well is they uncover points of collaboration. So I would say that having a daily Scrum meeting is the start of something, but it needs to go beyond that. All right. So Balaji asked the question: do we use any tools to get the feedback? The answer is yes. There could be multiple ways to do that. Jira is a fantastic way of identifying design decisions and then requesting that certain operations staff comment on that code as well. But I will say this though, if you're an organization starting out, that still becomes a little difficult to do, quite honestly. It becomes hard to do to quote unquote just use tools per se, Balaji. So we can, and there's tools like Jira, like I said, that are available that allows more collaborative and feedback on design decisions. Also, often there's like messaging tools like Slack. Slack is a great tool to kind of have a room dedicated to just that, talking to each other, right? So tools like the messaging apps, and those are great ways to provide feedback, as well as communicate with your customer as well. But I found that when you're first starting out, implementing those tools, it takes time to get them for you to get to a level of maturity that allows you to kind of do that flawlessly. So sometimes it's better to just kind of do those things, but it's also good to have face-to-face time to communicate. Balaji, he wrote another question. Jared, we can collect using issues or service desk. Absolutely. You can. So Atlassian, very specifically, while there's other options out there too, so don't get me wrong, I am most familiar personally with the Atlassian tool set. Atlassian products, they have a service desk and they have Jira that are separate implementations. But yes, you can use those to not only identify issues, but also provide feedback for what works and what doesn't work. So not a problem. All right, so one last question. Ritesh said, can I elaborate more on his previous point about daily Scrum meetings? So again, these daily Scrum meetings, so what happens is in a Scrum meeting is everyone gets together, and by the nature of these Scrum meetings, the goal is to identify blockers, to identify what you are doing for the day or for the next 2 days, depending on your frequency of Scrum meetings, but also to identify your blockers, right? So the goal is to make the team aware of the things that are directly prohibiting you from continuing to do your job or to do it effectively. What that does, it provides owners with the ability to help you resolve your problems, or it provides an opportunity for others to help resolve your problem as well. But again, the hard part about this stuff is that sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So just simply saying you have a problem may not always be sufficient, is what I'm saying. So while these daily Scrum meetings can be good to kind of identify surface level things, what I found to be a little bit more effective is just kind of being able to talk with the appropriate people about, i.e. having regular scheduled meetings with, it could be like production meetings, it could be code review, it could be design decisions review, it could be a few other things. I found those kind of face-to-face meetings a little bit more valuable for me in getting feedback from not only my development team, but also the people that are responsible for deploying the applications. They're like, hey, why you didn't consider this security issue that we're having? And because of that, we need you to use this library versus that one. Because as a fix, we're doing A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And that was a practical problem that I ran into when having that. So the point being is, again, it's important that we provide feedback loops and that we increase our ability to collaborate with these other people in order for us the organization to best produce a methodology and an application that does what it says we will do. All right? Does that answer your question, Ritesh? All right, great. All right, so DevOps. So it focuses on collaboration between developers and other parties, right? So we talked about that, about building, deploying, and operating. That's kind of where I was. And then just simply maintaining the software. So let me give you an issue that we ran into. So, and maybe you all can understand this. So there's a product that we developed over 15 years. In that 15 years of product development, there's been hundreds of developers that have added some mechanism to that code base, all right? So here's what happens when you do that. Excuse me. What happens is that you begin to get what we call spaghetti code, right? Code that kind of refers to a bunch of other stuff, and sometimes it's a lot less efficient, right? And then on top of that, it's poorly commented code, which drives me crazy, right? So what happens is that if developers left to their own devices, me being a developer, I think I can say this, we don't like documenting as a rule of thumb, although it's not always true. And as a rule of thumb, we just kind of really want to solve the problem. And sometimes solving the problem isn't always the most efficient way. So I'm saying all that because I'm stressing the point of collaboration, right? So how do we maintain our software in a way that allows for DevOps staff to address and identify certain problems that we have with the deployments? And a lot of that is by focusing on implementing non-spaghetti code, right, that I talked about, but implementing standardized code allows it to be easily focusing on readability over complexity. Focusing on readability over complexity. And the other thing I want to point out is also building documentation in such a way that allows people to understand why certain interfaces or code products are used versus others, right? So all of this ties together. So not only do we have to collaborate between people that maintain the building, deployment, and operating, but just in maintaining our software applications is critical. And the way that we do that is by putting the code in such a way that focuses on readability of the code, and it gives the DevOps ability gives them some insight into how that code works or runs. Okay, so very, very important point. DevOps is also it is about defining a flow, right? How are you going to go from development to production? Ultimately, that's the goal. But how are you going to do it in a way that maintains a high quality? How are you going to do it in a way that allows consistent results, right? So when you do it, the goal is to put in processes, to put in checks and balances and tests that allows you to consistently perform a certain task. So as a rule of thumb, where there's inconsistency, there's problems. If you would, the inconsistency is smoke, so to speak, and they say where there's smoke, there is fire. So whenever you begin to see inconsistent things happening, that's an indication that you have a problem. All right? So you got to define how you're going to move from development over to full-scale operations. DevOps is also about systems thinking with feedback. I think we kind of talked about that a little bit. But that systems thinking and feedback, the goal is to provide that a little further up front so that you can kind of work through those issues. All right? Again, the goal isn't you have to know everything in order to implement it, but the goal is to kind of make it in small enough chunks that allows you to close the loop or quickly fail and then provide feedback for issue resolvement, right? And then the emphasis is also on automating processes, right, required to release and change software, right? So again, software is always changing. There's always patches. There's always something. But you have to be able to consistently, and I want to stress consistently, be able to consistently and rapidly release these changes that happen at a certain rate, right? So important. So this is what DevOps is. DevOps is this way of thinking about problems in a way that allows you to identify problems, fix them, and make the fixes, and do that in a very efficient and quick manner. All right. And quick doesn't, and I want to say this part too, the things worth mentioning. Often when people say quick, they say, oh, that's bad, because quick means is often associated with not fully thought out. And that's not always the case. All right. All right, what are some DevOps issues? DevOps issues, solve requests and the requirements for a system, right? So here's the thing. Being able to deal with these requests and deal with the requirements for a system, whether they're new or whether they just kind of change existing requirements, is a key concept, right? So here's what often happens, and I think everyone can relate to this. I've been on a software tool, and I often work with proprietary organizations, or with organizations that have proprietary tools. So for this particular proprietary tool that I was working on, our goal was to simply, for you to be able to enter in a word and find, just to do a simple query, and we started out as just simply being able to search some documents and find the documents where this word appears. That was our goal. Okay, very simple. This was many years ago, and so great. We were able to do that. But then what happens is that any tool that achieves success, once you achieve success, guess what? More requests come in. So I see a question. Let me finish my thought real quick. Then I get to your question, Balaji. So more requests comes in. Once the requests come in, they begin to change the scope of your original tasking, or it adds various subtasks for you to now to complete that's still within scope, but provides additional capability to your software. Well, that's a good thing, but the question is, how do you begin to deal with those changes, and how do you manage change? And this is what DevOps do. Practically what you can see is like in Scrum meetings, particularly when you're trying to define who's going to work on what for your current cycle, your current sprint cycle, which is a way that often agile methodology, they kind of throw work in a particular sprint cycle, a cycle where people work on a particular task. And by the end of those 2 weeks, or by the end of that week, whatever the length of that cycle is, that work should be done, right? That's what a sprint cycle is. So what they do is that by the end of this sprint cycle, this work has to be completed, and those changes added for release at whatever period it is you decided upon. So how do you deal with those changes, right? And so DevOps is definitely about that, right? Now, back to Balaji's questions. What does software distribution means? So for the software distribution, simply what I mean when I say distribution, I'm referring to I should probably better say, let me correct distribution, software deployment is probably a better word. Right, this notion of just kind of getting the software from production over to operations. I am deploying the software to production. So, so here's what happens. Like, so developers develop code, and they write. They have a source program or a source file, and that code, that class in Java is often called, or that Java file or that C file, which are languages to program in, they take that file or series of files that are somehow connected. They take those and they package them up in some file format. That file format could be something called a jar file. It could be a war file for other applications. It could be a variety of things. And they take that package of files and they deploy them, or they move them to an operational environment where that when they run with a certain intent based upon the application. So when I'm talking about deployment, what I'm talking about is taking that code that developers wrote and then packaging it up and then moving it to a production environment. Does that make sense, Balaji? Did that answer your question? All right. All right, great. All right, Deb, Smita asked a very good question. She said, how much importance is on documentation DevOps? I would say it's critical, right? Because, and it's critical on several levels, okay? It's critical from a end user standpoint. So if you would, there's some documentation that you write. And often what I found is that when users use a particular application, if they don't have great documentation, that leads, often that's the biggest reason why people cannot use your application, and they generate tickets for easily solvable problems. So documentation from that standpoint, I think we all can relate to that, just simply using anything, whether it's email, whether it's this or that, documentation is the key for you understanding how to use it. But then from a strictly DevOps perspective, i.e. the notion of going between developers and quality assurance staff and operations, having documentation that one outlines all of the processes that you use is going to be key to helping put everyone on the same page. So you got DevOps from a processing standpoint. That documentation needs to kind of be clear. And often what we use on our job to do that is, primarily I'm familiar with Atlassian products. And so Confluence is a great tool to do that. Now, it comes at a cost, but nonetheless, it's a tool that kind of allows everyone, it's a Wikipedia type tool that allows everyone to kind of chime in and to create these pages of information that talks about the process. So I found from developer to developer, from operation to operations, almost all of us go to Confluence, this Wikipedia type tool, and we, in order to understand how something is configured, how it works, often that's my first stop, is that Confluence tool. So having that kind of documentation is extremely critical. All right. Yoti asked me, can I rename the tool? Matter of fact, let me show you real quick, okay? So again, I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to escape out of this real quick and go to the Atlassian product I was referring to. Again, there's other tools out there, and it really is. And there are many of them, okay? This is the Atlassian tool, and they have several products to include any of those. And I believe there was a question about Trello. So, potentially Trello is similar to Slack, but Slack is more message-based, Smita. Right. So, but nonetheless, what I want to point out is that you have Jira software and Service Desk, but this tool called Confluence, right? And Confluence it looks very similar to what we have here. Hopefully you see my mouse, or right here. This page right over in this area, this is Confluence. You have these menu icons over here, but it allows you to kind of design whatever it is you need. And it's just a great tool. And then the nice thing about it is that they have various plugins that have different functionality, right? So it's just, again, I think it's just overall, it's a really good tool that helps you kind of manage corporate information. So what I'm going to do, I'll put the link in the message box so that if, in your spare time, you can go look at it if you want to. But it's just another example of a tool that will allow you to kind of, collaborate and put down in a place to kind of document information as a whole. And I will say, without a tool like this, capturing corporate knowledge is very, very difficult. Somebody asked another question. So is it like agile management too? I would probably say Confluence in and of itself is probably not, but for the Jira is definitely helps with the management of the agile process. And they got several tools in here that allows you to work with that as well. So Jerome asked the question, if you implement DevOps, does it mean that the traditional IT ops team should now act to function as DevOps? Here's what I'll say. I wouldn't kind of say absolutely that's the way to go. What I think it depends upon is the skill set of your operations team. We said earlier, if we go back and look at this slide, we said earlier, DevOps is a way to is the intersection where these three areas meet. So if your operations team only have network skills, if you would, then maybe they're not quite the team to work through. Quite honestly, in my experience, and what I found is that the people that are more likely to have the skills to work in the DevOps tend to be software developers. Like if I were to start with a team, and if I were to kind of just simply say, you're going to be my DevOps team, again, it would be difficult. But I do think that generally, as a rule of thumb, software developers, because of their need to interact with a lot of different levels, often, although this isn't always true, often serve as the first stop to go. Now, I will say this too. Sometimes your DevOps team, they have a different spin on things, right? Your DevOps team may need to deal with primarily release management. Maybe that's kind of where your main sticking point. Well, if that's the case, then maybe the operations team might be better suited to deal with releasing and things of that nature. So there isn't a standard per se, but it really kind of depends upon your use case and really what is your primary focus right now based upon whatever gaps you have. Other DevOps issues include software design, development, testing, and release is the next step on the path. And we've kind of hammered that home. And so hopefully you understand that this flow is very critical. Additionally, DevOps issues include how you're going to package and distribute and deploy your software. Right? So, I mean, ultimately, that's a DevOps problem. And so, Ritesh, they asked the question, so tools will be used based upon the requirement, skill set, and infrastructure. I would say yes, Ritesh. And that's an important point because again, very rarely can we say in the DevOps world, one shoe fits everyone. It's important that you take a measured approach and understanding that I have these areas to consider, and there are several tools within each area that I need to identify. So yes, you want to look at your requirements, the skill sets of staff you have, and the infrastructure to determine what works best. So Smith asked another question. As far as distribution is concerned, when we look at it from a DevOps perspective, does it mean more, wider, basically like web distribution, which could be automated? Yeah, I think it could be. I think quite honestly, if I was just starting out, I would take it in smaller chunks with scripting and just kind of moving things. Because I think other factors that may include things like your architecture, right? How much software, how many nodes you have to move your deployment to. That's definitely a factor. Are you moving it from your private infrastructure to AWS, Amazon Web Services, which is a cloud provider? Or are you moving it to Google Cloud, which is another cloud provider? So I would say that deciding which tools to use, I think you would have to consider as far as automation is where are you moving it from and what are you moving it to? Those kind of things are going to be critical in answering so that you can identify what tools are best suited for me in automating what I need to automate. Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. So software packaging distribution, I'm on that third bullet down there. Software packaging and distribution and deployment. Again, that is because what I'm doing is defining the scope of the DevOps problem. Right? That's what I'm doing. So how to package your software, distribute it, and deploy it are major things. Now, on ongoing software operations or running the system, right? So this notion of being able to just simply operate it and monitor it, right? How are you going to monitor your system to include the hardware, the application, and anything else you have running on your machine in identifying problems? This is a big, big issue. Practically, what we're finding in where I work, often we're having to, probably just recently we changed this, but before we would have to have 3 or 4 different monitoring tools to monitor the hardware, the software, the deployed application, and so forth. And it was just problematic. Like which tool did I go to again when I want to see this? That's when you got 20 tools and they all do similar things, that is a problem within itself. And it also adds a great level of overhead to what it is you're trying to do. So Balaji asked a question. They said migrating to cloud-related issues also should be part of DevOps issues. And I think that's a very, very good point. And you're right. The fact that you're migrating, it has to be included as a part of the DevOps, absolutely. Because really, that migration is going to be conducted by the DevOps staff. Oh, so that migration, so I would say it comes under this third bullet here, Balaji, software packaging, distribution, and deployment, right there. And I think it would come in there, and then maybe even a part of part 2 as well, because the software developers have to develop with the fact that it's going to the cloud in their mindset. So often, each cloud provider provides a variety of tools that are accessible to the developer, right? And so them understanding that is going to affect all right, thank you, Balaji. It's going to affect their ability to deploy it, okay? All right, deployment issues. So deployment issues, again, are that notion of taking an application, a package of code, and moving it from the development system to production. That's deployment. So when deploying code or deploying the application, you're going to, there could be skill gaps that exist that may have been hidden, right? Because I told you before, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So the deployment of these applications, these web applications, and enterprise applications to servers, it requires people that have these special skill sets, i.e. DevOps, right? Additionally, the developers that write the application code or the software code, they often have little knowledge of the actual server itself, and that is a very true statement. While I may be a good coder, doesn't necessarily give me instant understanding of all the different nuances of operating an application server, right? Of upgrading it. All this has to be handled by DevOps. Operation teams install and manage the application server, right? So, and those people are usually not the developers, right? These are some of the deployment issues that we run into. And then lastly, what happens when the application is deployed into the server, right? So when at that point, You're going to need people who are both developers and operations to resolve any issues. This is why I said that in my experience, it's often better that for each project team that there are DevOps developers kind of working together to accomplish their goals, versus doing it the other way where you just kind of create a DevOps team and say they're responsible for all the DevOps stuff. Because they often don't, when it's done that way, they often don't have the perspective necessary to work through project-specific issues. All right. All right, so let's talk about this DevOps tool chain. This is, I'm gonna spend a little time talking about this. All right, this is a diagram of that same picture that's in the previous slide, okay? But I just wanted to be able to provide you with a few other things. I'm gonna escape out of this so you can see it, okay? So in this category of tools, you know, this is providing a template. You should have something that monitors application performance and hardware performance. You should have tools that allow you to release into production. You should have tools that allow you to deal with configuration management. You should have ways of ensuring accurate, good code development and unit testing. You should have tools that build applications, right? Sometimes applications come from multiple source files. And so having a tool that knows where to go to get everything is really important. And then you need to be able to perform integration and performance testing, right? Excuse me. Then lastly, just simply packaging the application. So there's a concept called continuous integration and continuous deployment. It's this notion that as code makes it in, as the changes are submitted for approval, and they are approved, that code is automatically tested and integrated with the the application. All right, so we got a couple of questions. Where does regression testing fit into this? I think regression testing can be done and it can be done in several places. Probably my first stop might be when building the application. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly, Yodi. Between building and integrating, right between these two. Okay. And then Balaji asked, can we get examples of tools for each step? That's exactly why I did it this way, Balaji. So we're going to get into that. Okay. So monitoring and let's start with monitoring and performance. Okay. So when monitoring, you have to be able to monitor both the application, the framework, and or the hardware. Okay. So the application itself, i.e. the code that you created, your hardware, and or framework. So what do I mean by framework? Like Hadoop is a framework that allows you to perform certain functions that your code may accomplish, right? So your code can use Hadoop, it can use MapReduce, it can use these other tools to perform a certain function, right? So you not only need to monitor your application that's using the framework, but you also need to monitor the framework itself that it's using. And then that framework is installed on several servers. So if you were to look at it from a perspective, this is probably a good perspective to look at it from, okay? So, so this may be your architecture right here. All right, these are your servers that your application is running on. Okay, so on these set of servers, matter of fact, let's put these a little further over here. On this set of servers, and let's just go server 1, server 2, and server 3. On this set of servers, you have to monitor these servers. But then you may have a framework. You may have the Hadoop data file system. You may have this, right? And that HDFS, as it's called, is deployed across multiple servers. So not only do you need to monitor the servers, but you also need to monitor your framework. And then what you might have, you may have another set of servers and let's just call these server 4, server 4 and server 5. And you may have this, and this is where your application resides, right? This is where it's on. And then what happens is that you need to be able to kind of talk to both of those, right? From the application to back and forth to the HDFS. So what's going to happen is that you're going to monitor all of the hardware to check out your I/O, but then you're going to monitor your framework to include HDFS, and a lot of times these frameworks have their own monitoring tools. And then you're going to have to monitor your application. Now, the crazy thing about it is those might be 3 separate monitoring tools. You go from monitor 1, monitor 2 to monitor 3 to see how all of these things are going on, right? So there are some tools that are better at doing that. Now, we can't get into all the specifics. I just want to kind of show you that there's some tools that are out there, okay? So one of the tools that can be used to do that is Nagios Core. Oh yeah. So one of the tools that are often used no matter where you go is Nagios, right? And while we can't get into the specifics about it, but I will say Nagios is the Nagios Core is an open source tool that allows you to download with limited capability, right? But a lot of time with these services, in order for you to get other things, they have other paid products that you can use to increase your capability, okay? So, and then probably the other thing that's worth noting, there are like thousands of Nagios plugins that you can use with Nagios. So that's the power of Nagios, because there's a big community behind Nagios that will often simply share their plugins that they have developed and written. All right. But at the core, it's kind of made to kind of monitor your architecture and if you would, OS related type things. Okay. So that's Nagios. Now, another one that is probably worth mentioning is, and you may have heard of it, is Elasticsearch. Actually, hold on. I'm going to put these tools in the chat box, so if you want to go back to them, you can, okay? So another one that's probably worth looking at is Elasticsearch. Now, things like this require a little bit more development to really kind of make it work and effective. But nonetheless, it's a great tool, and this is the one that I built personally. And I like it better than Nagios because it's easier to integrate the application monitoring, the framework monitoring, and the hardware monitoring as a part of that. It is a lot easier to me. And then from there, you can then begin to build analytics that kind of run to determine how these logs, when something breaks, identify when it breaks so that you can take action, right? Probably one of the main issues with HDFS is input output, right? Your ability to read and write. So as HDFS writes to disk, sometimes you have these disk bottlenecks. Excuse me. Where it's not writing fast enough or whether it's not reading fast enough. So Yodi asks, how do we define framework when it comes to multiple technologies and our applications involved, like BE application, mainframe, backend. So here's what I would say. Often when I think of frameworks, I don't necessarily think about the middleware portion, quite honestly, or even Java for that matter, right? Typically, when I think of frameworks, I think of frameworks that allow you to perform some functionality. For the most part, like some database framework that runs across, it's distributed. So if you would, you may have a piece that runs on server 1, server 2, server 3, server 5, and together they work to accomplish a particular end, a particular something. I think of that as a framework. When it comes to XML, Java, applications, and mainframe, et cetera, all of those can be used to implement a particular framework, right? So I don't necessarily consider those things as a framework. I think frameworks are probably an abstraction above what you just mentioned. So I also see that Smith asked the question, can Nagios be used on Windows? I think the answer is yes, although I'm not 100% positive about that one. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Now, what I don't know is if they charge for that one. I'm not sure about that. That's probably something you can look into. All right. All right, move on. All right, Elasticsearch. So Elasticsearch is, it's in itself, it really is like an index database tool. It takes data, indexes it, et cetera, right? But the cool thing about some of the things that you have available, is these products. So Elasticsearch is the core of the products, but you also have Kibana. And what Kibana is that it's a visualization tool that's very similar. So somebody asked, well, I'll get to your question in a minute, Smith. So, excuse me. Kibana is a visualization tool that allows you to visualize a lot of different things as well as kind of make some quick queries and create analytics. And it's just really just a nice query tool. It also does time series data, which, logs are time series related, right? You can do graph relationships, all kind of coolness with Kibana. So Kibana, if you would, is the visualization tool that the developer can use to get insight to their architecture. Now, with that being said, Elasticsearch is what would index the data. Okay. Now, this tool called Beats. Beats, these things, a lot of these are free now. Beats provide these different packages. They call them Beats. They apply the packages across different types of packages, and these packages do different things, right? So what you can do is I can take these different beats and apply them on a particular server, and then those beats will grab what information they have and send them to a central Elasticsearch repository, right? So let's just look at this, the beats family. So I can look at log files with FileBeat. And these log files are often what, different framework security things, they use those log files to record when something's going on. And you can send those with low latency to an Elasticsearch database. Additionally, there's other various metrics you can measure for. There's network data you can look at. There's window event logs, as well as your uptime as well. All of these things can be used and centrally viewed and coordinated with in Elasticsearch. This is why me personally, this is why I prefer this tool, because it's open source, number one, and I don't have to pay a cost to really kind of build these things outside of just development time. So is it recommended for much data-intensive applications like e-commerce domains, for example? Well, so I would be careful with this because Elasticsearch, it works really well. Like we have a lot of nodes, like, you know, thousands of nodes, and they're all kind of small execution of something going on in our system at all the time, and it works fine. But Elasticsearch itself, at some point, as far as it doesn't scale up to like petabyte scale, right? So the answer is that as far as your data intensive applications, it has the data intensive application itself doesn't necessarily have anything to do with Elasticsearch. What as far as the context in which I'm speaking about Elasticsearch just simply grabs whatever logs, whatever performance criteria you're putting out, and moves it over to Elasticsearch for processing. But it's a whole different conversation if we want to run those data intensive applications on Elasticsearch. All right. All right. So again, those are just a few about the monitoring performance. Other things to include releasing it into production. So that's monitoring performance. We've taken care of that piece. Now let's move on to releasing into production. And I got to kind of try to hurry up a little bit now. Moving into production, there's several tools that you can use for that. One of them I would probably recommend, and again, the things I recommend are primarily open source. And so Ansible is a great tool, and there's another one called Salt Stack. Both of these are similar tools, and you may probably heard of the most popular, just to kind of put it out there. Yeah, Chef is yes, absolutely, Chef and Puppet, yeah, exactly. These are some of the tools. Again, without getting into the specifics, you know, again, there's quite a few tools out there. They are similar. They're similarly kind of built, and the goal is to kind of move along this line of taking this code and once it happens, it's built, deploying it into production. And there's like several other one-off type things you can use as well. These are some of the more popular ones. Doesn't mean it's always the best, but it's one of the more popular ones. And these tools do a great job of not only releasing into production, but also automating a lot of your tasking to include configuration management, right? So if you would, the two on the left-hand side, releasing to production, configuration management, those are great tools that they use in order to do that, okay? Now, I think probably one of the top tools they use for building and packaging is a tool called Jenkins. And I'm sure many of you have heard of that. Again, another open source tool. They have a paid version for this, but they have thousands of plugins as well as a large community. This tool can be used to automate the integration and, excuse me, let's shut up, boy. For building applications and integrating performance, if you would, this is what we were talking about earlier, these two, building applications and integration and performance testing. Jenkins provides pipelines that allow you to do that to ensure continuous integration and continuous delivery. And there's other tools like Jenkins, one that begins with an H that I'm kind of drawing a blank on. I'll think about it here in a minute and I'll provide it to you. But there's other tools like Jenkins out there, and they are open source. For code development and unit testing, the unit testing runs well with, excuse me, with Jenkins But you have to write the test first, right? So the developers have to definitely understand the unit testing library and the unit testing mechanisms in order to properly write the test. Like I personally have moved from unit testing where I was using JUnit for Java unit testing, and now they kind of have this. They moved to a format that allows you to create answer files for your testing. Not so much just simply about testing each point of functionality, but it becomes more about really truly measuring the output of your code and what that means to ensure that something is working. So Balaji asked the question, can Puppet and Chef be installed on Mac machines? I'm not sure, Balaji, quite honestly. I just never really had to do that, so I'm not sure. I know Salt and Ansible can, but I'm almost certain they can be, because the whole point of them is to be OS agnostic. But I'll put that out to the class. Has anyone had to deploy Puppet or Chef on Macs before? No? Okay. Yeah. So, Beloved, I think the answer is yes, but I will have to verify that. So I'll put that down as one of my questions to answer. So another question, Jerome, they asked a question. Thank you, Smith. So Puppet can go on Mac. Excellent. Do I have tools that you can recommend for CI/CD for .NET, Windows, and Java Linux? So wow, a lot of questions. Excellent. So the question is, do we have tools that you can recommend for CI, continuous integration, continuous development for .NET, Windows, and Java Linux? So I know Jenkins is a great tool for continuous integration and continuous development. Continuous delivery, excuse me. For Java, most of my experience is Linux, quite honestly. Not so much as on the Windows side, but I'm almost certain that Jenkins can also run on Windows as well. Yeah, thank you. So it does for .NET. So Smith talked about .NET Windows. If you already have it around TFS, then you might think of that. Excellent. Okay. All right. Another one that they talked about was Team City, right? That's IntelliJ, if I recall correctly, right? Or JetBrains. This one. Yeah. So JetBrains, they bring up Team City, and it works with team integration out the box, but not necessarily continuous delivery. But it might be worthwhile to, there are many options out there for everyone. Again, I'm just kind of putting a few of them out there so that you kind of know where to go to help find some of those, okay? All right. Where am I? All right. Packaging the application. And so Pradeep, he also mentioned something too as well. I assume you electric is. Are you trying to say electric? Thank you. All right, that's what I thought. Okay. So Pradeep recommended perhaps Electric Cloud for continuous delivery. So actually, I never heard of that, but that's probably something worth looking into. All right. All right. Lastly, code development and unit testing. So for code development, I would recommend probably the most common thing that almost every developer team uses. Thank you, Pradeep, for that URL. Appreciate that. Probably one of the main ones. Oh, I've hit my time. Is GitHub.com. GitHub provides enterprise level support for you, and there's other tools that go along with GitHub for for packaging up your software and version control. GitHub, and then there's another one, an Atlassian product called not Bitmoji. I'm sorry. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, they got several. So they got Bitbucket is what I was talking about. Yeah, Bitbucket. Stash was the previous one, Balaji, that they used, but Bitbucket is kind of the latest version of that. And so they had it available for you as well. And Stash, I think, is the older version of Bitbucket. All righty. I think I've hit my limit, everyone. So got it. So as you can see, there are a large variety of tools that we can use to, a large variety of tools that we can use to work through everything. Hopefully, so Sanjay asked, is GitHub an editor like Eclipse? Sanjay, GitHub is not an IDE like Eclipse, an integrated development environment. It is not. GitHub just kind of keeps track of versions, and it allows you to integrate code. It allows you to control what is able to be placed in a release. All right, it controls what is able to. So everybody can submit their code, and then you can say, I want this code, this code, this code to be included as a part of this release to work through it. All right, so thank you, Balaji. That's a very good way to put it. It's version control tool to manage code of the developers at one location, or even multiple locations. So excellent. I'm not familiar with Dimension, Sanjay. But I would imagine you're probably right. So I saw a question in here that talked about it. Is it possible to put a question they didn't? Okay, Schmidt had asked, this is the second time TC asked this question. It's a tool, open source version control, the AM solution can integrate. Okay, got it. All right. All right, so I think that's going to conclude our session for today. Again, hopefully you found this session useful.
Hey, want to become an expert in cloud computing? Then subscribe to Simplilearn's channel and click here to watch more such videos. To nerd up and get certified in cloud computing, click here.